CEO fired a black single mother for being late. 2 years later, she owned the company that replaced him. Rain blurred the morning skyline as Amara Brooks rushed down the cracked pavement, her heels splashing through puddles that mirrored the gray, sleepless sky. Her umbrella had snapped 3 blocks ago. Her son's lunchbox was clutched against her chest like a fragile promise. Every breath burned from the sprint, but she didn't slow down. Not now. Not when her future was one elevator ride away. She had worked her entire life for this job. A junior analyst position at Grant & Cole Enterprises wasn't glamorous, but to Amara, it meant stability. A steady paycheck, health insurance, and maybe a small birthday party for Malik this year. After months of rejection emails and late-night prayers whispered into tear-stained pillows, she had finally caught a break. But fate, as always, had its own cruel timing. The bus had broken down miles from downtown. She'd begged the driver for another route, even tried to run part of the way. By the time she reached the towering glass building, the lobby clock read 8:20 a.m., 20 minutes past the start of her shift. She wiped the rain from her blazer, took a deep breath, and stepped into the elevator. As the doors slid shut, she caught her reflection in the mirrored wall. Tired eyes, hopeful heart. She whispered to herself, "Just keep your head down, Amara. Work twice as hard, life will catch up." But on the top floor, life wasn't catching up. It was about to crash down. When she entered the office, the room fell silent. Her coworkers glanced up, then quickly looked away. Waiting by her desk was Richard Grant, the young CEO whose charm filled magazine covers, whose arrogance filled every corner of the company. He looked at her, not with curiosity, but with cold judgment, the kind that never asked why. He didn't see a single mother who'd been awake since 4 a.m. He didn't see the effort, the exhaustion, or the willpower it took just to show up. He saw lateness, and that was enough to decide her worth. In that single humiliating moment, Amara's world cracked. She tried to explain, but he dismissed her with a smirk and a cutting line that echoed across the office floor. Laughter didn't follow, only silence, the kind that wraps around your pride and squeezes until it breaks. Security was called. She was told to pack her things, and as she walked past the rows of desks, eyes avoided hers. Some were sorry, most were scared. No one said a word. Outside, the rain had turned into a downpour. She stood at the curb with her box of belongings, a notebook, a few pens, and a photo of Malik in his preschool graduation cap. Her fingers trembled as she touched his smiling face. That picture was the only thing that still felt like home. For a long moment, she just stood there, watching the building disappear behind a curtain of rain. Her humiliation mixed with anger, disbelief, and something deeper. Resolve. She had been fired for being late, 20 minutes late, but she knew in her gut that what had just happened wasn't about time. It was about power. And in that storm, with tears she refused to let fall, Amara made herself a silent promise. One she would keep no matter how long it took. One day, he'll regret this. That promise became her heartbeat. It carried her through sleepless nights, through Malik's questions she didn't know how to answer, through every slammed door and every polite rejection. And while the world forgot her name, she began building a new one that no one could erase. Before we continue, take a second to hit that subscribe button. It truly helps us keep creating these stories. Your support means the world. If you were in Amara's position, would you have walked away or plotted your comeback? Let me know what you would have done in the comments. The days that followed were heavy, not with noise, but with silence, the kind that seeps into the corners of an apartment and lingers in the air long after the lights go out. Amara woke each morning to Malik's small footsteps padding across the floor, his sleepy voice asking if mommy was going to work, and every time she forced a smile and said, "Soon, baby." Soon but soon stretched into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Her inbox filled with rejection emails. Some were polite, others indifferent, but all of them said the same thing. "We've decided to move forward with another candidate." The bills stacked up faster than her confidence could rebuild. The rent reminder was taped to the door now, bright and humiliating. The fridge was half empty. Yet every night she still packed Malik's lunch for daycare, peanut butter sandwiches and apple slices, a small promise that his world wouldn't crumble like hers. Still, beneath the exhaustion, something fierce had begun to stir. On one sleepless night, with Malik finally tucked in, Amara sat at the small kitchen table, her old laptop flickering under the dim light. She stared at an open browser filled with tutorials, Excel, finance models, data visualization. Her mind absorbed numbers the way most people breathe. She didn't just want another job anymore. She wanted freedom, so she studied every night, every spare moment. She built spreadsheets, analyzed fake company data, watched online courses until her eyes burned. And slowly, the fear that once paralyzed her began to shift, transforming into hunger, into quiet rage, into purpose. She took freelance gigs online, small projects that paid barely enough to cover groceries. A bakery owner who needed her inventory sorted, a local nonprofit that couldn't track donations properly. Each task became another brick in the foundation she was secretly building. Her laptop became her weapon. And as the months passed, she began to see patterns others missed. Inefficiencies, overlooked trends, potential profits hiding in plain sight. Her reports weren't just functional, they were strategic. Her insight made small businesses stronger. Word spread. Referrals trickled in. Then one morning, a new message appeared in her inbox. Subject line, opportunity. It was from Elena Torres, a retired tech executive who had quietly invested in startups led by women of color. She had read one of Amara's reports through a mutual contact and wanted to talk. Amara hesitated. She had been burned too many times by promises that went nowhere. But something about the message, the tone, the simplicity, felt different. So she agreed to meet. The cafe smelled of espresso and ambition. Elena sat by the window, gray streaks in her hair, catching the light, a presence both calm and commanding. She didn't waste time with small talk. She asked about Amara's process, her story, her goals. And for the first time, Amara spoke without holding back. She talked about how numbers could tell stories, how behind every data set was a heartbeat, a business owner, a family, a dream. Elena listened. She didn't interrupt. She simply nodded, and when Amara finished, she smiled. That day, Elena didn't just offer guidance. She offered belief. Together, they formed Nova Analytics, a small consulting agency built from Amara's living room. The dining table became a desk, the wall behind her filled with sticky notes and scribbled graphs. Malik called it Mommy's Mission. The early days were chaos. Coffee-stained reports, missed sleep, client calls interrupted by cartoons in the background. But with every challenge, Amara grew sharper, faster, stronger. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building. And while she built, something else was quietly breaking. The empire that once dismissed her. Grant and Cole Enterprises, the company that had humiliated her, was losing ground. Years of unchecked spending and poor leadership had hollowed out the company from the inside. Projects failed, partnerships dissolved, and the glossy charm that once surrounded Richard Grant began to fade. The arrogance that fired her now poisoned his company from within. Every article, every rumor, every dip in their stock price. It was poetic justice unfolding in real time. But Amara didn't celebrate. Not yet, because she understood something deeper. Revenge wasn't about watching someone fall. It was about rising so high that they could no longer touch you. Months turned into 2 years. Nova Analytics grew into a respected name in business consulting. Their results spoke for themselves, and clients began calling her, not the other way around. And then one night, as she reviewed financial forecasts, she froze. There it was, a headline that stopped her breath. Grant and Cole Enterprises faces collapse, seeking merger to avoid bankruptcy. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from clarity. The moment she had promised herself under that storm 2 years ago had arrived. Fate had come full circle, and this time, she wasn't the desperate employee standing in the rain. She was the woman holding the numbers that could decide whether Grant and Cole lived or died. The irony was almost beautiful. 2 years after the rain-soaked morning that shattered her pride, Amara Brooks walked through the revolving doors of the same skyscraper that once threw her out. But this time, she wasn't an employee. She was an investor, a woman whose name now carried weight. The lobby hadn't changed. Polished marble floors, chrome pillars, and the faint scent of money. But what had changed was her. Gone was the exhausted single mother rushing to clock in. The woman walking in now was poised, confident, and self-made, every inch of her reflecting quiet power. On the surface, her visit was professional. Her firm, Nova Analytics, had been invited to consult on a possible merger, a desperate attempt to save Grant and Cole Enterprises from collapse. But beneath her calm expression, her mind hummed with memory. Every corner of the building was a ghost. Every reflection on the glass whispered, "They thought you'd never come back." Upstairs in the boardroom where her career had ended, the mood was tense. Executives whispered over spreadsheets, the air thick with fear and caffeine. And at the head of the table sat Richard Grant, still handsome, still polished. But the spark of arrogance that once defined him had dimmed into desperation. His empire was bleeding, and he knew it. He had no idea that the woman about to walk through the door would be the one to finish what he started. When Amara entered, the room turned. Her presence commanded silence. Her posture, her steady gaze, even the subtle click of her heels. Everything about her said control. She introduced herself as the lead from Nova Analytics, here to discuss restructuring strategies. Richard shook her hand without recognition. For him, she was just another consultant, another chance to save his company. But for Amara, the handshake felt like closure disguised as formality. She listened as he spoke, confident yet hollow, about profit margins, investor trust, and innovation. It was almost poetic. The same man who once told her she didn't belong was now pitching his survival to her. She asked sharp, precise questions. Every word professional, every smile measured. And as the meeting dragged on, she caught him faltering, stumbling over numbers she had already dissected. Her expertise cut through the room like glass. The board members leaned in, impressed. For the first time in years, Richard wasn't the smartest person at the table. But she didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Revenge wasn't about noise. It was about silence. The kind that makes others realize just how wrong they were. After the meeting, Richard followed her out, offering to discuss figures privately. He was polite, even deferential, a man suddenly aware of his fragility. As he spoke, she watched him closely. There was no arrogance left, just exhaustion hidden behind charm. It struck her how quickly power shifts when ego meets consequence. That night back in her office, Amara reviewed the merger proposal again. Her team was excited. This deal could elevate Nova Analytics to the next level. But for her, it was more than business. It was destiny folding in on itself. She remembered the rain that day, the way her voice had trembled as she pleaded for her job, the sting of being escorted out while others looked away. And now here she was, sitting in her glass-walled office, deciding whether to buy the company that once made her feel invisible. Her mentor, Elena, noticed her hesitation. She placed a hand on Amara's shoulder and said softly, "Don't see this as revenge. See it as reclaiming your story." And those words stayed with her, because the truth was, Amara didn't want to destroy Richard Grant. She wanted to replace him. Over the next weeks, she led her team in dissecting every weakness of Grant and Cole. Financial leaks, inflated projects, neglected partnerships. She mapped it all out like a surgeon preparing for delicate but inevitable surgery. Her strategy was brilliant. Instead of tearing the company down, she'd absorb it, transform it, use its structure as the foundation for something stronger. By the end of the month, Nova Analytics made an offer. It wasn't aggressive. It was clean, strategic, and impossible to refuse. The board of Grant and Cole accepted unanimously. Richard was blindsided. He didn't understand how quickly it had all moved. One moment, he was trying to save his legacy. The next, he was signing it away. And still, he hadn't realized who orchestrated the takeover. Not yet. The announcement was scheduled for the following week. A press event to unveil the merger and the new CEO who would take the reins. Richard rehearsed his speech, unaware that the woman about to step onto the stage beside him was the same one he'd humiliated 2 years ago. The night before the event, Amara stood by her apartment window, city lights shimmering against the glass. Malik was asleep, clutching his stuffed lion, unaware of the empire his mother had just conquered. The city that once swallowed her now bowed beneath her success. And yet her reflection still carried that same promise, the one she'd made under the rain. One day he'll regret this. The morning of the merger announcement dawned with the kind of sunlight that didn't warm. Sharp, golden, and cold. The city skyline gleamed like 1,000 watching eyes. Inside the ballroom of the Westford Hotel, cameras flashed, journalists murmured, and investors filled the front rows, waiting to witness the rebirth of what was once a financial empire. Grant and Cole Enterprises was set to announce its merger with Nova Analytics, a partnership framed as innovation, not desperation. The banners read, "A new era of strategic brilliance." But behind the polished stage and manicured smiles, a different kind of story was about to unfold. Amara Brooks stood backstage, calm but steady, dressed in an elegant black suit that whispered quiet authority. Her hair was pinned neatly, her notes perfectly organized. But beneath her composure, her heart pulsed with history, 2 years of struggle, growth, and preparation culminating in this single moment. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't even angry anymore. She was ready. Across the room, Richard Grant adjusted his tie, checking his reflection in the mirror for the 5th time. The once golden CEO now carried the faint shadows of sleepless nights. The charm was still there, the smile, the posture, but the certainty was gone. This merger was his lifeline, his last shot at staying relevant. He didn't see Amara yet. When the announcement began, the stage lights washed over everything in gold. The moderator introduced Richard first, visionary leader, strategic thinker, and founder of Grant and Cole Enterprises. Applause followed, polite but thin. Then came the second introduction. And now, please welcome the CEO and founder of Nova Analytics, the woman behind the revolutionary consultancy that has reshaped small business growth across the country, Miss Amara Brooks. The name hung in the air like a spark before lightning. Richard froze. His hand stopped mid-clap. For a brief, dizzying second, he thought he'd misheard. But then she walked onto the stage, poised, confident, and undeniably familiar. Every detail he'd once dismissed, the curve of her smile, the calm determination in her eyes, struck him like a memory surfacing too late. His expression faltered as realization rippled across his face. The audience saw a composed businesswoman stepping into success, but Richard saw the ghost of the woman he had humiliated, alive, unstoppable, and now standing beside him as his equal, or worse, his replacement. Amara didn't glance his way, not once. She took her seat, unfolded her notes, and smiled at the cameras. When it was her turn to speak, her voice was steady, rich, and confident, the kind of tone that carried not just authority, but truth. She spoke about resilience, innovation, and empathy in leadership. She spoke about the companies forgotten by giants, about workers who carry dreams bigger than their titles. Every sentence was both business strategy and personal declaration. Without naming names, she told her story, and every word made Richard shrink a little smaller in his chair. The audience applauded. Cameras flashed. Investors nodded. They didn't realize they were watching a full-circle moment, the dethroning of arrogance by grace. Richard's smile stiffened as the moderator announced the final detail. With this merger, Nova Analytics will assume executive management of Grant and Cole's core divisions, under the leadership of Amara Brooks. The applause erupted. Reporters leaned forward, typing furiously. Richard's title, CEO, evaporated before the crowd's eyes. His empire, once untouchable, now belonged to the woman he'd publicly fired for being late. And still, she didn't look at him. The event ended in a flurry of handshakes and congratulations. The cameras followed Amara out of the room, her every step measured, elegant, controlled. Only when the doors closed behind them did she allow herself a breath. Slow, deliberate, victorious. In the hallway, Richard caught up to her. He didn't speak right away. There were no words big enough to bridge the distance between who he'd been and what he'd just lost. His pride, once unshakable, cracked under the weight of silence. Amara finally turned to face him. Her eyes held no anger, just calm certainty. The kind of peace that only comes after surviving storms meant to drown you. And in that moment, without a single word, he understood everything. Because the real punishment wasn't public humiliation. It was knowing that the person he once dismissed as insignificant now stood higher than he'd ever reach again. He extended his hand, a gesture of defeat, maybe apology. Amara looked at it for a moment, then nodded politely. She shook it, not for him, but for herself, to close the chapter completely. As she walked away, the sound of her heels echoed against the marble, the same rhythm that once marked her exit in shame, now marking her return in triumph. Outside, the same city that had watched her fall now bowed beneath her rise. The breeze caught her hair as she looked up at the skyline, remembering the promise she'd made that rainy morning. One day he'll regret this. And now, he finally did. Weeks passed since the merger announcement, yet the echoes of that day still lingered across the business world. Headlines called it the most unexpected power shift of the year. Analysts praised Amara's strategic brilliance. Investors called her the phoenix of finance. But behind every headline, behind the numbers and the applause, was something far more powerful. Quiet vindication. Amara didn't celebrate with champagne or parties. She celebrated by showing up to work, early, focused, and ready to lead. But this time, she wasn't reporting to anyone. She was the leader. Under her direction, the new company, a fusion of Grant and Cole and Nova Analytics, began to transform. She rebuilt the toxic culture that once thrived there, replacing it with empathy, collaboration, and integrity. Where fear once ruled, opportunity now flourished. The same office that had once felt like a battlefield was now a place where people smiled in the hallways, where late arrivals were met with understanding, not punishment. Amara had turned humiliation into reform and pain into policy. Her leadership was quiet but firm. Every decision she made came from experience, not ego. And every young woman who joined her team saw her not just as a boss, but as proof that resilience could rewrite destiny. Even Richard Grant, now working as a consultant outside the empire he once owned, watched from afar. Some said he regretted everything. Others said he admired her. But Amara never sought closure from him, because closure wasn't something he could give. It was something she had already built. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Amara drove home through the city lights. Malik sat in the back seat, telling her stories about school, laughter spilling through the car like sunlight. He didn't know the full story yet, only that Mommy was the boss now. At a red light, she glanced at him through the rear view mirror, his small smile, his wide eyes. They were the reason she never gave up. Everything she had done, every sleepless night and every tear she'd swallowed, had led to this simple moment of peace. That night, after tucking him into bed, she stood by her apartment window, the same spot where she once stared out in despair. But now the city looked different. Not intimidating, not cold. It looked possible. Below her in the distance, the skyline shimmered, and among the buildings stood the Tower of Grant and Cole. The same place that had once taken everything from her was now hers. Amara smiled softly, not out of pride but gratitude, because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destruction, it's transformation. She thought about all the people who had been told they weren't good enough, the single mothers working twice as hard for half the recognition, the dreamers who failed but refused to stay down. Her story wasn't just about payback, it was about possibility. And as she stood there, the reflection of the city lights flickering in her eyes, she realized something simple, something she wished she could tell her younger self that day in the rain. You didn't lose your job that morning, Amara. You found your purpose. And that was the story of Amara Brooks, the single mother who turned pain into power and whose quiet revenge changed everything. Sometimes life pushes you down, not to break you, but to make you rise higher than before. Remember, rejection is not the end of your story. It's just the beginning of your comeback. What part of Amara's journey spoke to you the most? Her fall, her rise, or her peace? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We rate every single one. Please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us keep sharing stories that move hearts and spark hope.